Today on the podcast, I welcome Ed Byrne. Ed has a really interesting background where he did a lot in scaling startups, in funding startups, acquiring them, etc., especially in software, but he has pivoted most of his energy and time into the regenerative agriculture space. Why this is so exciting for me to have conversations like this is because we've had a lot of people on the show in the past who are producers, farmers, etc., trying to do the production of goods to help with the regenerative agriculture movement, but Ed's done it the other way. So he looks at things from a business perspective. How can we get this to scale? How can we have mass customer adoption? So that way, when you go into an aisle in a grocery store in 5 or 10 years, you see an organic aisle, you see a regenerative agriculture aisle. That to me is what I'm most interested in. So this conversation, we dive a lot into the things that we need to be able to get regenerative agriculture at scale. So if you're wondering what the future of food looks like, this is a really interesting podcast for you. And also, if you are interested in being entrepreneurial, we need people in this space. So this is a good episode to get you primed for hopefully thinking about this in a very different way. So tune in to this one, and I hope you guys enjoy. This episode is brought to you by White Oak Pastures, a fully regenerative farm based out of Bluffton, Georgia. If you guys don't know how obsessed I am about regenerative agriculture, you probably haven't been around listening to this podcast for a long time. This is a type of farming that mimics natural ecosystems to restore the loss of soil, biodiversity, and best of all, pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. I recently actually just purchased a farm here in Texas to start learning about this myself, but White Oak has been around doing this for decades, and it shows in the research. They actually recently got a study done showing that for every pound of meat that you eat from White Oak Pastures, you're actually putting 3.5 pounds of carbon back into the soil. When you have this ecosystem where all the animals work together, you actually get carbon pulled back in the soil. Whereas the fake meat, Beyond, Impossible, et cetera, they put 4 pounds of carbon into the atmosphere. So if you're gonna really do any sort of choice for the environment or for your own health, this is the way to do it. These are the types of farms to support. I love their products, and not only their animal products, which they have a bounty of, all the way from the classic chicken, turkey, pork, and beef, but also guinea, duck, rabbit, goose, etc. I mean, this is what it takes to have a regenerative model. And you can try them all today for 20% off with code NATURALSTATE. Just head to dranthonygustin.com/meat to check out some of my favorites. I love all their products, but one of my favorite is actually a wild card here. You probably wouldn't be able to guess, but it's their beef tallow body wash, which I use daily instead of soap. So if you want to try out some of the best regenerative meat on the planet, head to dranthonygustin.com/meat and use code NATURALSTATE for 20% off your order. This show is also brought to you by Altura Naturals. When I considered sponsors for this show, I reached out to Andy, who is the founder of Altura, and pretty much begged him to support the show just because they are the only products that I trust to put on my skin. So much garbage is in skincare products that it blows my mind. I cannot find any other products. I do not put anything else on my body other than Altura. It's actually a lie. I use White Oak Pastures beef tallow soap in the shower, but other than that, everything sort of pre-post around that is Altura. And if you don't know why, your skin is the largest organ in your body. It absorbs everything you put on it. And men are less known for using sort of skincare products, but women average over 250 chemicals that are in their bloodstream from their skincare products by the time they walk out the door in the morning. That is ridiculous. I personally use the moisturizer, the clay mask in my sauna, and the Pearl cleanser. My fiance uses way more. She has a little bit more of a skincare routine than I. And the products themselves are made with the highest end ingredients that you would ever find in skincare products. This stuff's incredible. Andy himself is a testament how these products work. He's been on the podcast before to tell his story, but it was amazing. He was in a horrific accident. His face got all mangled up, and he basically made this formula to heal his scars, and he is now a male model. That is not a joke. He has incredible skin and is obsessed with the quality of his ingredients and the sourcing of them. He was just in Hawaii recently sourcing one ingredient of the many that are in one of his products. This guy goes, visits every single farm and product, and it is incredible. The quality you get here is by far the best in the industry. And so I begged him to sponsor the show and also begged him to give you guys a little bit of a hookup. So if you use code AG20, you'll get 20% off in free shipping over at Altura.com. That's AG20 at ALITURA to get 20% off your order at Altura.com. Ed, thanks for joining me on the show today.
No, thanks for having me. Thanks for doing the podcast. It's great.
You got it. You guys are doing a phenomenal thing here. So before I start gushing about what you guys are focused on, just maybe give it a little overview about sort of your focus and work right now and how you're helping the regenerative ag movement.
I wonder, is it a good, will I give a quick, background of how we got into this? Because I think everyone has kind of their own story of how they found regenerative, because it's regenerative agriculture, because it's still such a emerging space. And I don't know about you, but most people I talk to still look and go, what is regenerative agriculture? So we probably think it's bigger than it is because we read things about it every day, but in the real world, it's still tiny. And so my business partner, Lou Mormon, our day job for the last few years and still is Scaleworks. And so we acquire and invest in software companies. And I think there's a little bit of a parallel in the food system and in what happened in software in the last decade. So you look at cloud computing and SaaS, and it went from nowhere to a massive industry. And the incumbents, the Oracles and things of the world, had a really tough time because their centralized on-premise model just doesn't suit the cloud. And I think when you look at the food system, it's it's the world's biggest industry. It's a massive, massive industry. It's about to undergo massive change. And I think COVID, if anything, has exposed the fragility of a centralized food system. But the incumbents are, built on an industrial model, which I think we now know doesn't really work, even if the intentions originally were good, and a centralized model, which doesn't really work either. And so I think it's an exciting time to be in regenerative because the whole logistics system, the whole infrastructure needs to be changed. And I think it's going to be by entrepreneurs and by startups rather than by the incumbents, which just creates this massive, massive opportunity for the next couple of decades.
Yeah.
And so, go ahead.
So yeah, were you guys looking at it from like, okay, we're investing in these software companies and we want them to scale. We're really good at that. How can we push this for food? And like, why do you guys care about food? I mean, there's a lot of very smart people in software and tech and startups that don't ever make that shift, which is like, it's really confusing to me. Like when you think about these people should be focusing on our biggest problems for humanity, and they're all trying to like figure out how to, make the Uber for cat food or something like that. And it's like, this is not what we should be focusing on. Like, obviously I'm very opinionated with what I think the biggest problems in the world are. But curious as far as how you guys thought, okay, this is where I want to put my time. As far as
let me answer the second part first. The software in the last decade has attracted so many entrepreneurs, so many people, so many clever people. Before that, it was finance and real estate. And, I don't want to say we lost a lot of our smart people to it, but, we kind of did, because it was the most attractive profession. And if you're a high achiever and ambitious, that's where you go, right? You're out of school, you figure, oh, this is where I'm going to build my career and my wealth. And software has been that. And so I hope that, if we and others in the space now at such an early stage can have a good impact, it becomes attractive to entrepreneurs. I mean, it should be, but it's not currently obvious that it is. I mean, farm bankruptcies are still through the roof. And so, people leave farms. They don't typically go to farms. And I hope that this revolution of the migration to regenerative agriculture will start. So in 5 or 10 years time, you'll say, oh, there's so many entrepreneurs in the space now, we're saturated.
So basically, there's not like large exits. So there's not entrepreneurs saying like, hey, I devoted all this time in education and focus, and like this is a big problem due to like the big value that's being attributed to it.
Yeah, I don't think the entrepreneurship in regenerative agriculture has even started. And so in software, you could argue that it's too professional now. I mean, you meet founders who are experts at equity and term sheet and fundraise negotiation. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, you look in regenerative agriculture, the founders you talk to now are experts in their domain. They're product experts, they're engineering experts, but they don't really have a clue about, how to raise money. And so, we want to help them to get better at that and professionalize it. But I think it's better when you've got domain experts becoming entrepreneurs, rather than kind of this professional entrepreneurialism, which just hits software. And I think in a few years, the more people, we start getting some early exits, early successes in regenerative, more startups, that will attract smart people. And smart people in the businesses will go and set their own businesses. And so, look, this is a snowball, and, it starts small, but once it grows and it attracts more smart people, which it will, then they'll attract more smart people. They'll go on to set up businesses. And so I hope the time frame isn't long. It might be, but, I've no doubt that it will happen.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that pisses me off most in CPG, the packaged food industry, is that you have people who are industrialized, sort of like, oh, this is how to make money in food. You make this thing that's sort of like adjacent to what's out there right now. You make it look cool. You have this claim about health. You push it through these channels. You grow the brand, then you sell it to General Mills. Like that's a playbook that people do to make these better for you brands right now. And nobody cares about health because nobody knows about health. Like in this space, it's all people who have been in it forever, who leave Hershey's to start a company, leave Nestle to start a company, or who are people who are startup who see that and they come into this space and aren't domain experts in health, which is what I think food should be. Like if you're selling somebody,
by the way, I think it's worse. I think these people don't care about health, but they know consumers do. Yeah. And so all of a sudden you've got, I mean, look, beef is a great one to talk about. You've got grass-fed beef. It's in a feedlot. It gets grass pellets in its corn diet. It's like, but people don't know. And so playing on consumers' want for healthy food, I think is actually it's a worse problem than people, they don't care. They know consumers care.
Yeah, it's tough, which is why it excites me that the regenerative field is so open and so new. So yeah, why did you guys get into it?
Back to the original question. Look, my family and I'm from Ireland, probably obvious from my accent, but my family in Ireland are farmers, and so I spent all my summers and weekends on a farm and loved it, and so I probably always had a passion for it, and an interest in it, and it's so especially compared to we're both sitting at desks now. You finish your day job in the typical business or technology world. It's hard to point out what you did. It's very easy when you're farming to say, here's what I achieved today. It's it's a very wholesome profession. And so and my business partner Lou has a ranch, and we just got talking about quality food, and I watched the steak revolution, about the world's best steak, and the controversy of in America, everyone likes young animals, but the best steak I think was a 14-year-old cow in Spain that was very calm.
What is all this? The steak? This is like
the steak revolution. Yeah, it's a great documentary. It's just about the best the best steak. How do you get the best steak? And it goes through. It starts in a restaurant in New York and ends up somewhere in Spain. So well worth watching.
14-year-old cow.
I shouldn't give you the ending, but yeah, that's what wins. But it goes. But it's an interesting. You start looking. Oh, what would be then for a fun conversation? What would be the best steak? Would it be Wagyu, which is typically known as the most marbled on grass in Ireland? And you look and go, okay, well, then I read Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma, which is a great entry for anyone I think into this space, and his great line of "It's not what you eat, it's what you ate." That really stuck with me. And his book introduces the world, I guess, but introduced me to Joel Salatin. And then you start getting deeper into, it's not about necessarily the animal or where you put them. It's the quality of the forage, it's the quality of the grass. And well, actually, it's not about the grass, it's about the quality of the soil. Because if you don't have quality soil, you're not getting quality forage, quality feed, quality grass, whatever. And so you're not going to have good animals. You're not going to have healthy, tasty, nutritious food. And so, when you remove all the layers, you realize it's all about the soil. If we have good soil, we have great produce, super nutritious. And then you look further and go, well, shit, we're destroying our soil. The UN, that famous report, we have 60 harvests left. Obviously, not all land is the same, but as a general principle, of course, we're destroying the soil. We add more and more chemicals to it every year because there's less nutrition in it. Have we lost, is it 35% or something is the average nutrient quantity drop in like a carrot or an apple or an orange in our food? And that's scary. I mean, that's the wrong trend. And, you can basically now be, and you know more about this than me, but you can effectively eat the right food and still be malnourished because it's just not the same quantity of proteins. And so, so you're looking, okay, so soil, it's all about soil. We're destroying the soil. It's agriculture is, I don't know, 20+%. If you look at, whatever the latest and greatest report is on the impact of the climate. So it's a big contributor to our climate disaster. So we have this kind of dual climate and health crisis. And if we fixed our soil, not to oversimplify it, but if we fixed our soil and changed the way we did farming, actually we would largely solve a lot of the health crisis because we'd start creating, nutrient dense food without loads of chemicals. And every day there's another report about Monsanto being sued for glyphosate and, down some GMOs. And, soil wants carbon. So farming the right way removes tons of carbon per acre from the atmosphere. And so you get this amazing win-win-win that you almost never really see, I think, of better food system, better food for people, better land quality for farmers, happier, healthier animals. And we can help, make a dent in reversing climate change. Okay, well, this is great. And then we talked to some farmers, and the universal thing was, look, farmers they're actually a good community, and they're great at talking to each other and sharing best practices. But what we heard a lot is, we need guys like you. We need business guys. We need consumers to know about this. We need to commercialize this. It can't be 100 local farms selling in the local community, competing with each other. We need to find a way for this to become mainstream, so we can bypass the middleman and go straight to the consumer. And that's a business challenge. And I don't think farmers should have to be food producers and the product commercializers. And I think so. Regen needs that. And long answer, I guess, your question. But Lou and I said, well, look, I think maybe we can help you. We're passionate about the space. We've been in it for about 2 years in terms of researching, and Lou set up his ranch and converted it to regenerative. And so, the more you learn, the more opportunity you realize there is, and there's people starting to do things. But we hope that the experience we've had in scale work supporting multiple companies, we can bring a little bit of that business expertise into regenerative.
Yeah, have you seen today that Singapore is the first country to allow literal lab-grown meat to be consumed and sold?
And I don't even know where to start with this. I mean, we give out about racing COVID vaccines through trials and the risk of that. I mean, I think these things should be at least as scrutinized as a COVID vaccine. I mean, wow. You've got look, it's the whole fake meat revolution. They've done, by the way, they've proven the power of brands, and this is why we need to get a meat brand. Because the Impossible brand and Beyond brand, they're good, they're great brands, they're consumer recognized, they play on our fears. But I hope it's a fad. I mean, taking a monocrop, first of all, which is bad for the environment, taking a monocrop and sending it's not even into a factory anymore, sending it to a lab, and it's effectively a chemical vat. And on the other side, saying, now, what do you want from this pea protein or this corn? Do you want meat or chicken or shrimp? I just don't know how we can put that in our bodies and think it's good for us. And so it's a scary trend.
And I think that a big thing about it that people don't understand, like you said, where soil is being depleted, we can't grow as much stuff. Things aren't as nutritious. The answer isn't to put things into a beaker and it being more nutritious. Like that's not the problem we have here. And people need to realize that food, like energy, needs to come from somewhere. You can't just create energy out of thin air. Nutrients have to come from somewhere. You can't just create those out of thin air. So you're going to have to still extract those nutrients somewhere from the planet. Like we're not good yet at going to space and grabbing stuff and reorganizing it to make whatever we want. Someday we could get there. We're going to destroy ourselves, but we're not there yet. So the nutrients, we say, okay, we're doing this lab-grown meat. There's energetic inputs and nutritional inputs that we're going to have to go other places and probably take out of the soil anyways. And you're basically mining the earth instead of, in the regenerative model, having a cyclical thing that we can participate in that's not destructive. I mean, I don't understand, like, do people just not understand like the basics of physics and biology? Probably not. We don't cover those things very well here in school.
This is the downside of the power of brands. I mean, the upside is people trust them. The downside is people trust them. And so you get a brand saying, I'm super healthy and meat's really bad for you. And people are like, well, I have heard meat is bad. And I guess this is the same nutrition as meat. And I don't think people really think about, one, the input cost. I mean, it's still environmental destruction doing these things because they're unnatural. And two, that, we don't get some of the basics right. I mean, it's, to think that we can create fake meat without nature that's been doing this for millions of years and it be healthy and not bad for your body and the environment. This is why I think it should have more scrutiny than a COVID vaccine. I mean, we're too early to put this stuff on our body and not worry about the downsides.
We've not once succeeded, not one time that I'm aware of. You are, let me know, but making something man-made completely in a factory and consuming it and it being good for us. Not once. And we're always sort of overconfident in the result. Oh, vegetable oils are great. Oh, Crisco, trans fats, it's like butter, but we can just make it in mass and use these cotton seeds and push them through this little thing and spread it just like butter. No problem. I mean, we see how these things end up. Eventually we go, oh shit, we really messed up there.
Yeah, but this time we got it right. This time it's going to be different.
I mean, we have literally not one time succeeded in trying to make something man-made be healthy. Not once. So I don't know. It's just so strange that we don't learn from these mistakes.
No, we're 100 years into the industrial ag system, and the industrial food system are great marketers. And so whatever consumer sentiment is, they market to it. But I think we've got used to, like we, the world of food consumers have got used to, food is not all natural. And I don't know that we connect the dots anymore. I mean, people eat a burger, but they see a cow, they're really connected. That's where it came from. I think we've divorced ourselves from the reality of the origins of food so much that we read natural and healthy and we believe it, even if 5 minutes of thinking would realize that it's not.
Yeah. I mean, I tweeted something recently saying that hunting is, you could do the same thing for farming if you're like going to be the actual person in the farm, raising the animal, killing it, et cetera. But like, is the best way to simultaneously have people respect animals, the planet, and their own bodies. Because like, if you go through the process of, again, if you're farming the animal or if you're going out to hunt it, killing it or raising it and then killing it, processing it, cooking it, that whole thing, you go, oh, okay, I understand what life and death is now. And like, oh, I'm a part of this thing. This thing's also like me when it's dead. Like, I'm going to die too, but I need this life to continue my life. And then you throw its carcass in the ground and then bugs eat it and it decomposes and all the leftover bits, like, and the grass grows greener there. It's like being so divorced from nature has just, like you said, is divided our thought around what food is, what life is, what death is. We saw this in COVID, which is like really interesting, of like, just not even, it was almost like people thought humans shouldn't die. Not to say like it wasn't tragic. There are people who, their lives ended earlier, but this is part of living, is dying. And all life needs things that die for it to live. Everything. Trees need bacteria and organisms in the soil to die so that trees can have nutrients. Everything this is like the cycle of life. And it's strange to be divorced from it. This is why I'm so excited to grow and build my farm, is just to constantly be aware of this and in this, instead of living in a city where I have a little bit of grass in my backyard, but overall walking around Austin, I don't have that much connection with nature. I can go to Barton Springs, I can go to some of these areas and go to a park, but really living in it every day and seeing life and death is a very powerful experience. I think a lot of people, we used to have that every single day for the vast majority of our human history. And now we're just completely divorced from it.
Look, I totally agree. I mean, one of our goals is that you've got the luxury, and it's fantastic to be able to grow your own food and have a small farm. And farmers often also say, how do I find regenerative produce? Oh, well, talk to your local farmer, go see them. And like, that's all correct, but most people can't do that. Most people don't have time to do that, right? Or the money to do it, or the ability to buy and run a farm. People are busy. I mean, one of our goals is, if we can increase consumer awareness, then consumer demand will go up. I mean, I think the sentiment, that consumer sentiment around what you eat impacting your health is massively growing. And it's been a huge change in the last 5 or 10 years. Huge change. It's super positive. But I think consumers need to understand what regenerative means. I mean, so if we can increase awareness, the ideal shouldn't be that you have to have your own farm or grow your own food. That's great. That's a great aspiration. But if you're, a working couple with a couple of young kids, you're like, you got no spare time. You want the regenerative aisle in the supermarket. You want to know, if consumers start asking their supermarkets, say, where's the regenerative produce? Eventually supermarkets will say, oh, okay, we have an aisle here. This is a section you'll get it. Mm. Or hopefully the whole supermarket changes to it. And so I'd like to get it to, when you talk to people about regenerative, like, yep, know exactly what it is. Don't really understand the details or how the food makes it, but I know that's the best thing to eat. I think that'd be a great place to be.
Do you think that there's a problem currently, you're talking about branding and how important it is, that there's not a unified approach to what regenerative means in the farming community?
That's definitely a double-edged sword, because farmers, mostly rightly, don't like regulation, and different land needs to be treated different ways. And we are, this is the idea of regeneration, is that, first of all, obviously regenerating the land and our health, but that we work in partnership with nature, right? Because nature's been doing this a lot longer than we have, and it's got it right. And so that does change based on the location and what you're trying to do, and you have to learn the land. And then you look at, organic, as it's become more popular, has basically been bastardized by big companies. And now you've got, inverted commas, organic food that you can still spray some chemicals on. I mean, is it really organic? Is it what people believe it is, and that level of quality, and from that, like the local farm, and not a monocrop? I mean, no. So I think we've seen that organic as a trademark, or that level of regulation, probably has some downsides. It's an upside, and it's obviously better than the other way. But so I don't know that regulation is the way. I think, and it's probably the business person in me, but I think consumer brands will win, right? Because you look at Apple or Nike, like they are high trust consumer brands. If they do something to break that trust, they've broken trust, they've destroyed their entire business forever. It's really hard to get the trust back. And so, if Apple made a crappy, cheap phone that, it was cheap, but it wasn't great, that their brand is ruined forever. They are a high quality company. So if we get consumer brands in regenerative, then I don't think we need, government help. I think consumers will believe the brand. And if the brand doesn't hold true to their promise and their authenticity, then I think that brand is screwed. And it will come out eventually. And so I think leaving it to brands also, leaves a lot more room for entrepreneurship and figuring out what's right and seeing what the consumer wants and seeing what works for the farmer. And so I hope brands are the right way.
It's just so tough currently because regenerative agriculture is 9 syllables. And I talk to people like, hey, this is what I'm interested in. And like, okay, what is that? And like, okay, it's this thing where, everything plays off and it's like, it's good for the soil and for you and the planet and all this stuff. And like, well, isn't that just grass fed? Like, well, no, not really. Like, this is like one of the core problems I still see is that there's not a really good definition. It's a mouthful to even communicate what it is, let alone the 2-word, 9-syllable sort of like a regenerative agriculture moniker is, I think, challenging in itself. Grass fed's easy, 2 syllables. There's a connotation there. I mean, saying agriculture, people don't even understand what that word means if they're not involved in farming.
Look, but I don't know that it has to be agriculture. I mean, when we looked at this originally, we said, God, consumers are never going to say regenerative, let alone regenerative agriculture or anything else. And, so we talked, what should it be? What's the right word? And like regenerative has got, early traction. I know a lot of people know about it, but it's the only word that's being used right now. And so, I don't know, does it become regen? Is there a little sticker in time? It's regen written on it and people buy into that. So I don't know where it goes. I 100% agree. It's a long, convoluted phrase, but I don't know what the option B is.
Should we just start using regen? I'm down with that. It's 2 syllables. Okay,
it's done. Right, it's here. It's now. Regen.
Listening right now, please only use the term regen because it will help everybody out over a long period of time. I think that part of it you get a lot of division from what I've talked to farmers of, farmers are very prideful, and it's been tough saying like, okay, well, I'm doing all this work to regenerate my soil to this degree, but this farm over here is not doing as much. And so they shouldn't actually get the regenerative tag like I get it. This is another problem that I've seen. But, again, it's like, how do you preserve things? Like you said, organic has gotten bastardized. Talking to Robbie, the CEO and founder of Force of Nature recently, who went out to this big bison ranch, Ted Turner Bison Ranch. And he said that they had a property line on the other side was a organic blueberry farm. And it was just decimated. It was like the soil was completely scraped over and it looked like the surface of the moon. It's like, do we think that is good? It's organic technically, but do we think that's good? No, of course not. And so like, how do we get to a point, you talk about from the brand perspective, like what can brands do to ensure that, at the end of the day, when being motivated by profits, as that's what companies do, that they're not cutting corners and there's some sort of standard that says, okay, this is actually what your regenerative is?
Well, I mean, look, first of all, so we launched a company called Wholesome Meats. So that's our consumer beef brand for regenerative agriculture or for regenerative produce or for regen. And so we have protocols, right? We make sure all the farmers follow the protocols. Over time, we may do more on traceability. We acquired a small company called Pasture Map. And so our ranchers use Pasture Map. And so maybe in future, we'll be able to track, if not the animals, the movement of them to show that farmers did this. And for us, it's, look, if we're not true to our brand, then it will either come out or someone else some other brand will launch and do a better job of proving to consumers that this is regen, this is super high quality produce. Here's the farmers, go meet them, go look at the produce, look at where the animal came from, check it out. And so, like you can lie to a consumer for only so long before they figure it out, right? And so, we look at like brand authenticity for us is everything. And I think for any brand that's going to enter the space, that it has to be everything. And so, I think it's on our website, we publish the protocols that we use. As they emerge and change, we'll change with them. If there ever is a clear definition that people follow, great, we'll adopt that too. I don't know that it needs to be any more than that.
Yeah. I mean, you talked earlier too about, these are just the problems that I have in the back of my head. So it's good to just chat them through with you. You've obviously spent a lot of time thinking about them as well. But another big one to me is distribution. So what seems to be in vogue right now is we have operations that are doing a really great job, but to be at scale and to continue to grow, they need to basically sell their products online, and they're shipping across the country with dry ice, which eats up the bulk of their profitability, and they have to charge more for that. Do you think it's some sort of blend of like a decentralized but local sort of distribution network where you have like a lot of last mile deliveries, things like that? Or like, how are you guys thinking through that as you're operating Wholesome Meats and thinking about the distribution problem?
Yeah, look, the distribution problem is one is the ultimate problem here. You know, that's why you know centralized food systems have worked so far. I think, you know, the early adopters, of which everyone buying regen now is, will pay the extra. You know, so you get your dry ice. It's kind of hilariously inefficient to ship something from Oregon to Texas or pick a location where, you know, it's regen, but the cost of not just the dollar cost, but the environmental cost of those logistics probably negates it to a little bit. But it's great to support those producers. And so as it grows, local will be easier because there'll be within a 20, 50 square mile radius, there'll be more producers. There's always going to be things you can't get in your state or in your country, but as we get more local, and then I don't know exactly. I do think a mass distributed decentralized system is, to me, obviously the right way, because farmers are mass distributed and decentralized. And so, you know, the current supply chain, you know, and infrastructure and processors and logistics does not suit that at all. But that doesn't mean it can't be changed, right? And you get local processors, or maybe a co-op of local processors, and you share the logistics of moving the animals for animals, right? And the same can be done in crops. And I think of, look, the analogy of the Uberization of the world, where you can connect your phone to this network of drivers, and the app in the background is making these connections. I'd like to think there's an analogy there that technology can help reduce the burden of, I mean, the middleman solves, I need to get milk and I need to get meat. Where am I going to go? Well, I'll go to a grocery store because they've figured it out. But that was pre-technology. And so I'd like to think there's ways that we can without, you know, me having to go to 20 farmers. I mean, you know, no busy consumer is going to go to 20 different suppliers, right? They still need one place. But I think we'll see over time. I mean, Milk Run just launched in Austin. I think we'll see over time many different models coming to solve that, right? The last mile, or as supermarkets adopt it, and hopefully regenerative, you know, stay strong and try and sell direct, right? So, but the supermarket can cut out the middleman, or cut a lot of the middleman out, which still helps farmer economics and gets better food to consumer. So that might not be in the short term, but you can be sure that if less efficient logistics models take off and consumers are prepared to pay more, or a subset of consumers are prepared to pay more for that produce, you can be sure supermarkets will follow and find a way to get that farmer the same economics and have that produce in their stores.
Yeah, I mean, we see with COVID how things have shifted a little bit. There's a lot of this ghost kitchen thing ramping up. You have even Amazon with Whole Foods. They were testing some ghost grocery stores as well, where, you know, it should theoretically lower the costs, or you should be able to sell, you know, higher quality stuff at the same price of what people are used to currently, if you don't have the same sort of logistics and fixed costs that requires to have an actual grocery store up and running all the time. So, I mean, so many of these things are so interesting to me, like how we're going to solve the distribution problem. Do you guys have any companies that you're working with that are looking at this right
now? Not really on the distribution piece. I mean, so for Wholesome Meats, we do it ourselves for now. You know, we sell directly to restaurants, we sell online to consumers, and we work with some retailers and hopefully more to get in store. And so the part for us is the supply chain. Even more so than the distribution, right? There's not that many regenerative producers, and you need, if you're going to sell at scale, you need a scaled and ready to scale supply chain. And the current economics. I mean, when you look at, you know, I talk about the massive opportunity here. I mean, if you drew a stack of, you know, from farmer all the way to consumer, all the steps in there, all the layers of processor, packaging, USDA inspection, quality, last mile distribution. I mean, there's just so many layers, and I think pretty much all of them are going to have to be reinvented, and should be reinvented for the new model. And it should end up being, ultimately, you want farmers making more money, right? I mean, I want my food producer to be rich, and I want it to be a super attractive business for people to go into, and I want farming to attract clever people. And I want people who are on farms to want to stay on farms and not have to get off farm jobs. I mean, what we eat outside of the environment, what we eat is pretty important. And so I think as that whole stack or farm to fork or supply chain gets changed, I think there's tons of new business will be set up. We're looking, for us right now, we're working with ranchers with Pasture Map, consumers with Wholesome Meats, and we're trying to do more on the processing. Processing is a big focus area for us now. Processing is economically just a disaster. I mean, you look at, maybe it costs a local farmer $300 to get an animal processed, and it costs Tyson $50. And so you wonder why grass-fed meat is more expensive. I mean, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't really be, right? I mean, there's no inputs. You've got the grass. You put an animal in a feedlot. There's massive inputs, huge logistics. Okay, so maybe some government subsidized, but it's a less efficient model. They're just at such scale, they've got the economics down. And small farmers processing 5 animals, is never going to be able to compete with someone bringing in truckloads. And so I think on that side, there's a lot we could do. And I think mobile processing, we're not doing anything in there right now, but it's a very interesting space for both for ethical food eaters who don't want to see animals ever be stressed, and for foodies, because a tension-free animal it's just tastier meat, right? So if you can do the processing or even the original, the kale on land, it doesn't matter where it's butchered really. I think that could make a big difference. And so, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think that there's any sort of hope of things like the Prime Act pushing through and changing some of the regulations around processing?
I really don't look at the government side of it, because with all of that, there's a pro and a con. And I want to believe that the business, the entrepreneurial approach here will win. And and consumers ultimately will get what they want. And if we can increase consumer demand, more farmers will do it. And more people will solve the supply chain. And if we can solve parts of it, or we can support companies that are trying to solve parts of it, great. I mean, we are so early in this phase that I'm not sure if, look, the processors need to be, certainly the USDA inspection needs to be made easier, right? Having one inspector per plant just it means no small farmer can ever get it economically. And so, but I'm nervous of early regulation. I mean, even if it looks like a win at the face, I'm just nervous about it. And so anything we get, great, let's take it. But none of our models or businesses rely on the government changing things. And I think that's the right way people should approach it for now.
Yeah, interesting. So distribution, a bit of branding thing, consumer demand. Like, how do you think we increase consumer demand? Just by making a better product?
This podcast is a great start. I think. Look, make a better product doesn't mean this. We've all learned this in the software world, or even probably in the podcasting world. But better product doesn't always win. I mean, it often doesn't win at all, because you spend so much time making a better product, you forgot to tell people about it. And so, I do think we need to generate consumer awareness so that they ask for it. Of course, we need to have the products. We don't have the products, we have no hope. But there are lots of farmers doing this, and they're small. I think consumers need to start asking, what is regen? Where do I get regen? How can I, is it in my local store? Is there a local farmer? I mean, even if they went to the farmer's market and said, are you regeneratively farmed? You can be sure people are going to start listening to that. And so the real question then is, how do we increase consumer awareness? Because, the world is littered with consumer startups that have failed and spent a lot of money doing it. And so how do you always, really in the ideal world, you want to harvest demand, not create demand, because creating demand is, education is very expensive. I think we're in the education phase. I think there might be some very little bit of latent demand for regenerative produce, but we need to massively increase that. And so more podcasts like this, more Wholesome Meats like products, more consumer products for regen, grocery stores starting to advertise this is regen. I just, I use a snowball analogy. I think we're starting to talk about it, right? We're doing this podcast right now, and you're probably talking to more people about it. And so you're doing the farm, you're talking to people, how we accelerate that. I think just more people talking about it and asking for it, and more brand service and that demand, I think is the way.
So that would help, obviously. Regarding economics of farming in general, have you guys seen any sort of yield differences in your research? It's saying like, if we can transition, because I know this model, I forget what company is doing it, where they're saying, okay, well, if we get people, if we fund people getting on regenerative and converting conventional to regenerative, actually the yield increases by a certain percentage. And so we'll take a carry of that. Are you guys looking at any sort of things like that, where it be, if we do regenerative, we actually get more yield per acre? But like, where have numbers landed there, if so?
There's it's so new, and there's so many different studies. I hate to kind of pin on just one, but I think common sense generally wins in these things, right? Like, fake meat doesn't make common sense. And regenerative produce, when you look at it, does. And so when you look at, as a farmer, as a producer, the industrial model is you have so many inputs, right? You're writing checks all the time to pay for fertilizer, to pay for tractors, to pay for pesticides, to kill some weeds, to send the grain to the cattle, to put it in the feed. Now, there's just so many inputs. And in regenerative, there shouldn't really be any inputs, or very, very low inputs, because you're working with nature, and nature's free if you take care of it. And so if you've no inputs, and currently the output, forget yield for a second, because people can always debate that, right? And quality of land and time to transition. But the output, because consumers are paying more for this. So the output is a higher price product, a premium product, right? We'd like long-term for not to be premium, but for the next 5-10 years, this is going to be a premium area. And so if you've got lower input cost, higher output sale price, and if you're really working towards cutting out the middleman, so you double increase your margin, this should be far more profitable for farmers regardless of yield. So, and again, I'd like to think common sense is, well, if I spend less to make it and I make more selling it, even if I've got slightly less of it, I'm still in better shape. And then if I can cut the middleman out, or I can reduce their take by half because we've got a better direct-to-consumer model, then, I'm just juicing my profits. And we haven't even talked about carbon credits for the farm yet. I mean, that's early and still, I think it's solved. I think it's not, verified yet. I think that's the big problem. But that's more, I don't want to say free money because people are doing the work for it, but it's more margin enhancement. And so this should be a vastly more profitable and fulfilling model for farmers.
Yeah. So I'm sure you've seen stuff that like Indigo is doing around carbon markets and things like that. Like, do you think that's going to be able to work for smaller farms?
I can't speak to Indigo specifically, or I guess I don't want to, because whatever they're doing is what they're doing. The look, again, common sense, right? I mean, we want to extract carbon from the air. Okay, should we do that with things to remove it and suck it into the ground and hope it never comes out again, or make blocks of carbon from the high tech fans to pull it out of the air, or should we put it back in the soil where there's 16 times more carbon in the soil than there is in the atmosphere already, and the soil, it's not storing it as a favor to us. The soil wants carbon. The more carbon in the soil, the more life there is. The more life there is in the soil, the better forage we get. The better forage, the better food. And so, hopefully common sense wins. I think Australia already pay farmers for doing regenerative, and they pay them, I don't know what the rates are, but they pay them per ton of carbon per acre. And so I think, again, I'm sure you'll ask about regulation. I don't know, don't care. I think the voluntary carbon market now, every day you see another tech company, even oil companies, that are saying, oh, we need to offset our carbon, or we want to offset our carbon because it's good for all our stakeholders, shareholders, employees, customers want it. And so I think the real issue with soil carbon credits for big or small farmers, but I think most regenerative farmers are going to be small, is how do you verify it, right? So how do you say, okay, I removed this many tons of carbon, or added this much soil carbon this year per acre, and so I think, with PastureMap, we can see the movement of animals, right? And you can infer pretty well if the animals are moved every 1 or 3 days across this land and not brought back for 90 days, the mob grazing or rotational grazing approach. And you can see with satellite images now that the forage density and heat changes, which is a good sign that the soil is changing. And so I don't think the issue is with people being able to say this is happening. I think it's with this is probably where there does need to be some kind of accepted standards, because no company is going to buy soil carbon credits instead of forestry credits, which are relatively accepted, if they can't say when someone says to them, well, how do you know that? And they want to be able to say, well, this is how it's verified. This is the system. This is the accepted approach. And so that's one area where we need to get an accepted approach that people say, yes, I agree that this is approximately right, that a ton of carbon was moved if you did this. And so if we could get a generally accepted definition of that, I think very quickly there will be a big market for soil carbon, for buying soil carbon credits. And that would attract more farmers to doing it. I think farmers would love to get more dollars per acre for the existing work they're doing.
Yeah. Even I've had a challenging time figuring out testing the soil and figuring out carbon levels in the soil and all this different stuff. It's not easy to do so. And I think that could be an easy way to I don't know if that's, there's different ways to game that, right? So if you put it in one part and then you concentrate everything around that, and then everything else is being neglected, well, then that's a problem. Do you test every single acre? How expensive is that? Does it even offset the cost of the carbon credits anyways? Testing of the soil and having some sort of benchmark there seems to be a huge opportunity.
Yeah, look, soil tests are super expensive. And, you can self-administer them, but do people trust you and trust you to do it in different spots or the same spot every year? And so I think, look, I don't know how it'll play out ultimately, but I'd like to think that it'd be a model of soil tests are great because they're direct and they should be done. They should be done, by an independent verifier. Maybe they're done every 5 or 10 years. And then, we get, it's very easy to get satellite images now. And so with a tool like Pasture Map, and there's others, where you can see the movement of the animals, you can verify it with satellite imagery, and you can see the density of the forage. Right? If you're doing regenerative grazing, your forage is going to get denser, and you're going to see heat changes in the ground. And so that won't happen on land that is, if you're trying to cheat and you say you put the animals there for the day the inspector is on site, and you don't do it for the rest of the year, they're in a feedlot gaining weight, your land is not going to change at all. And that is verifiable from a distance. And so I'd like to think, and that's much, much more scalable and cheaper. And so if we can do that, and that becomes accepted with, audits every 5 years or every X years, maybe it's a random audit and it's done in, this geographic region, or it's compared to other people. Look, the trees grow at different rates too. And so if we could get that model, I think you're right. It's unsustainable or uneconomic to do soil tests all the time every year. It's also not 100% accurate. Right? There's never going to be 100% accuracy, for every meter of soil. But if we can get good enough models that say this is with 90% accuracy going to be right, and we can use satellite images and things like that, then that to me seems to be scalable and economic.
Right. Besides what we covered so far, any other miscellaneous business ideas that you're super excited about in this space?
No, excited to find more. I mean, now that we're starting to kind of, I guess, talk to more people in the space, you realize, this is a nascent little community, and every day there's a new, really interesting business, doing, using robots to kill weeds rather than pesticides or burn them down. And so I think the supply chain is in the very early, or the infrastructure chain is in the very early stages of already being changed. It's super exciting, and I think it's great, and I hope to see more. And I think the big unknown is still, how do we affordably, you talk about what's economics of soil testing, what's the economics of building consumer awareness? And because that, I do think that consumer demand will solve supply. Simple, but we have to get consumer demand.
Yeah. I mean, I was like, this is where I'm trying to get some sort of hard information, because I think people are incentivized mostly by their own problems. So what I mean by that is, like, everybody talks like they care about climate change. When it comes down to it, they don't spend their money on that. They're not actually spending money on climate change, things like that. They care about them looking better, feeling better, having health, whatever. So how do we prove even more so that the best regenerative is more nutritious than, let's say, even a grass-fed, run-of-the-mill grass-fed steak or something like that? Obviously more than a conventional. Like, how do we create that stratification? Like, how do we get this data that people seemingly need now to make these changes? So I have some ideas on this currently. I'm actually working on a project. I'm sending a bunch of meat cooked in various ways to third-party labs to test out linoleic acid composition, fatty acid composition, nutrient composition, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm curious myself.
Look, I think these are emerging already a little bit. There's studies every day of, even just grass-fed, the nutrient, or what is it, the omega-6, omega-3, better than me, than conventional. And Dan Barber is a great person for talking about the nutrient difference in some of the food he grows. And so we have this idea of, you talk about what consumers care about. I think first they care about taste, right? I mean, it can't be medicine. It has to taste great. And regenerative food should just taste better. I mean, it might be different, and better is subjective, but it is a real taste. And then second, it should be, especially if you're buying for your family, you want it to be super nutritious. You want this to be good for you. If it tastes good and is good for you. And then third, yes, this is great for the environment. But I do think that's an intention, but people are not going to eat, food that tastes like medicine just to make the environment better. It has to taste and be good first.
I mean, I think of it sort of like, I've thought about hosting steak tasting sort of things and creating this like craft meat sort of culture where, I mean, we saw this in so many other places. We saw this in chocolate, in coffee, wine, et cetera. People are now flocking to these things and doing different tastings, all these third wave coffee bars, things like that. We're not used to eating animal products that taste like anything.
Well, and we should be. And I don't know if you've read Mark Schatzer's book, Steak.
No.
And so he, similar to the steak revolution, right? He talks about the best steak and he travels the world. But at one point, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but he talks about the Is it the flavanols? Basically the flavor markings, the number of different types of flavor markings. In red wine, it's something like 230. I think in chicken, it was maybe 10. I can't remember the exact, but beef, red meat was 200 plus flavor markings. And so it's almost as complex a flavor as red wine. And you look at, how many sommeliers we have, and people are into wine tasting. And I totally agree. Beef can and should be like that. We should savor every bite. And it's great that some taste different. I think one of the big challenges and problems we've created is that everyone gets meat that's fatty and tastes the exact same. It's crap, but it tastes the exact same. And so again, this is the education challenge going, yeah, but you don't want all your wine to taste the same. Why do you want all your meat to taste the same? It can be as flavorful, and that's generally a better sign. So I think if you do meat tastings, that's a great idea.
One of the many additional projects that I have on my plate that I'll try to get my clone to take over for me. Well, appreciate the time today, man. Where do you want to send people who are maybe young entrepreneurs curious about this whole space?
Soulworksnaturalcapital.com. Contact us if you're doing anything in the space. We'd love to talk to you. As you know, we started a thing called the Regeneration, regeneration.works, which basically we just send a weekly newsletter, and we're trying to, aggregate great content in the regenerative space, because it's, like you said earlier, it's just hard to learn about this stuff. And so if you just want to learn more in general, when we're not publishing our own content, we just, the best finds of the week, basically, we stick into the newsletter. So.
And then Wholesome Meats for you guys.
Getwholesome.com if it's to buy meat, and even better, ask your local store and restaurants why they don't have regen produce, and you can suggest Wholesome Meats.
Cool. Well, thanks for your time, Matt. Appreciate it, man.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Natural State Podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate you heading over to whatever service you're listening to this podcast on, dropping me a 5-star review and your thoughts on the show. This helps us get discovered by more people and spreading the good gospel of health. And if you want to stay plugged into all of my self-health experiments, recent research and books that I'm reading and my interpretations of those things, products that I'm testing, and thoughts on all things related to health, check out my free weekly newsletter called The Feed. You can sign up for that at dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. That's dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. Thanks again for tuning in your support of the Natural State Podcast.